From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kayleigh Lyons.
The Fed holds rates steady with its updated forecast signaling stagflation. And Chair Powell seeing a transitory tariff impact. We'll have more former Treasury official Christopher Smart of the Arbroath Group.
President Trump phones Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who joins Russia in agreeing to an energy infrastructure ceasefire. General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, will have reaction.
And former DNC chair and Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida will join us later this hour. Her take on growing Democratic calls for new Senate leadership after Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's decision to support Republicans' government funding bill. Thanks for being with us. The late edition of Balance of Power on this Wednesday, Fed Day, and that is right where we start with today's meeting. No change in rates as expected, with policymakers citing uncertainty around the economic outlook, the impact of President Trump's policies on growth. Today, raising estimates for unemployment and penciling in 2 quarter-point cuts this year. In the news conference following the announcement, as you saw and heard live on Bloomberg TV and radio, Fed Chair Jay Powell speaking to the relationship between inflation and tariffs.
It is going to be very difficult to have a precise assessment of how much of inflation is coming from tariffs. Clearly, some of it, a good part of it, is coming from tariffs. Inflation has started to move up now, we think partly in response to tariffs, and there may be a delay in further progress over the course of this year.
For more, let's turn to Bloomberg's Mike McKee, who was in the room for that press conference. Mike, I think we all could have anticipated we would get a lot of that particular T word, tariffs. I'm not sure anyone was counting on the T word transitory making a comeback, but it did.
I wouldn't put too much stock in that. I think it was sort of just something stuck in his head. Historically, tariffs have raised the price level, but it's a one-time thing when you raise the price level. The problem for the Fed is they don't know if Donald Trump is going to raise tariffs on April 2nd, on May 3rd, on July 23rd, or anything like that, because he keeps changing his mind about everything, and he takes tariffs on and he takes tariffs off within the space of a single day sometimes. So they can't really say what the long-term effect is going to be. And basically, this central bank is flying blind now. They don't know what's going to happen. Tariffs are not good for the economy. Some of the other policies they're talking about are not good for the economy, but how bad, how they will affect the economy, and whether and what the Fed should do about it, totally unclear.
I had to chuckle when I heard this today, remembering Larry Summers talking to David Weston, compared this short-term pain for long-term gain approach by this White House. He called it the new transitory. So I guess here we are. To your point of flying blind, though, how much progress did Jay Powell make today in calming the waters, calming the markets? Well,
it looks like he calmed the markets, and I think probably the takeaway was he was calm, cool, and collected, and he said, we got this either way, and right now we're in a good spot. We have inflation moving up a little, but it's fairly steady. Unemployment, fairly steady. The economy still showing signs of reasonable growth, even if it's slowing a little bit. No reason to panic. And you can read that how you want on Wall Street, and obviously there are people who are going to read that as, hopefully we get a rate cut soon. But I think it just the idea that the Fed's not panicked has probably been good news today.
Great to have you in Washington. As always, Bloomberg's Mike McKee with us on a Fed Day. As we add the voice now of Christopher Smart, Managing Partner at the Arbroath Group, former Special Assistant to the President for International Economics. It's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio to pick up on Mike's point here. How long will the Fed be flying blind, and will that last after April 2nd?
Well, I was getting excited that I could get out my Team Transitory T-shirt again until Mike tells me I should move that to the side. But I think the Fed, Jay Powell is the master of understatement when he talks about the difficulty in projecting either growth rates or inflation trajectory for the economy. I think it's going to be increasingly difficult. As Mike pointed out, tariffs in themselves, a one-off adjustment, is a transitory effect. But tariff wars, it's not just the unpredictability on the U.S. side, but it is the response from Canada, China, the European Union, that makes it even more unpredictable. So I think what markets are watching ever more intently are the measures of inflation expectations. And right now, the five-year forwards are relatively stable. And I think that underpins a lot of the confidence that you're seeing today in the markets. But I think that's something the Fed's going to be watching very closely.
Well, it was interesting to hear Chairman Powell today throw a little bit of cold water on the notion that we should put too much stock into UMich inflation expectations specifically. But I think a lot of people were looking at the Fed's own inflation expectations in the SEP today in tandem with their lower growth expectations. It caused a lot of people to say the word stagflation, which is actually something we also heard from Heather Boushey, formerly of the Council of Economic Advisors in the Biden White House. This is what she told us earlier.
So now they are still working to get the inflation rate back down to their target rate. And at the same time, the tariffs are likely to raise prices for consumers. But they're also seeing people cutting back. Again, with DOGE, you're seeing, these effects on employment. So, the word that I think people are going to start wondering about again is this word stagflation that we were all, of course, talking about at the end of the first Trump term. That was the word on everybody's lips. That's where we were concerned about the economy being.
So if it's on everybody's lips, Christopher, is that warranted or overdramatic?
Well, you saw it in the summary of economic projections from the Fed today, right? You saw inflation tick up slightly in their longer-term projections in the next couple of years, and you saw growth come down certainly this year. So I think that is a reasonable scenario going forward. There are lots of uncertainties around any of those assumptions, which I think makes things even more difficult for investors. And to your point about what level of uncertainty or what measure should it be Michigan Fed or other surveys in terms of inflation projections, I think we all just read the news every day and feel like there is very little predictability in U.S. economic policy right now, which is what has been roiling markets.
Christopher, we just heard some comments from Kevin Hassett in the White House driveway as he was talking to reporters a short time ago. Of course, Director NEC asked about this idea of negative market sentiment surrounding the tariff policies, the comments today from Jay Powell. He said he respects the independence of the Fed too much to weigh in and cherry pick the Fed chair's statements. Is that the new relationship now between this White House and the Fed? How would you describe it?
Well, I think, that's sort of welcome non-interference from the Trump White House these days. So I think that's probably what we would hope for in terms of non-comment and non-cherry picking. But I'm not sure we're going to expect the president to be restrained in the next weeks or months if the economy does indeed start to slow and he turns his attention to the Fed. And, what seems like a reasonable policy of let's do nothing until we're sure whether the next move should be up or down. I'm not sure the president, will be so restrained in his remarks.
Well, the president didn't seem to be too focused on this particular decision today, at least on his social media feeds. No Truce social post yet that I'm aware of, Christopher, though we did get, of course, a Truce social post and other statements from the White House today related to his phone call with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. When you consider the administration's efforts to reach a ceasefire in that war, what's happening in the Middle East as well, while we factor in all these domestic risks around tariffs and what the economy will look like, what about the geopolitical atmosphere? How does that factor into all of this?
I think it factors in the background. Certainly the path of any kind of war or ceasefire in Ukraine will have bigger implications for Europe, for example, if there is some sort of lowering of energy prices or access to Russian gas in the year or two ahead. Frankly, right now, today is a good day in the sense that both Russia and Ukraine appear to be ratcheting down their level of hostilities one notch in terms of a ceasefire that avoids energy targets. But there's a long way to go to get the two parties to agree to any kind of a longer-term solution. And what you're seeing is an increasing divergence in interests, not just between Ukraine and Russia, but between the U.S. and Europe and Ukraine and Russia. So getting all four of those parties aligned is going to be a tall order for the president. I think those things weigh on investors' minds, but they're still probably secondary to the path ahead for growth and inflation that the Fed has been focused on today.
All right, Christopher Smart, managing partner at the Arbroath Group. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll continue this conversation ahead in the aftermath of Zelensky and President Trump's phone call, the agreement for an energy ceasefire with Russia. We'll have more on that next with retired General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe. He'll join us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The minerals deal was that first set of framework that you all saw in that very public meeting with President Zelensky and President Trump in the Oval Office. We are now focused on a long-term peace agreement. We've moved beyond just the economic minerals deal framework, and we're looking at a lasting ceasefire. Right now, we're at a partial ceasefire. But again, the president is sending his highly skilled, intelligent, and experienced team to Saudi Arabia later this week to continue fighting for peace in this conflict.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt earlier today providing an update on efforts to reach a ceasefire in Ukraine in the wake of Russia's invasion. This, of course, comes after President Trump's call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky this morning. And joining us now for more here on Bloomberg TV and radio is retired General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe. General, welcome back to Balance of Power. When we consider where this starting place seems to be, a ceasefire on just energy and infrastructure targets specifically, how easily, in your mind, can this be expanded into an actual truce, or is the hard work really just beginning?
I think the hard work is just beginning. This is a ceasefire, if it happens, that's fully in Russia's favor. Ukraine has now acquired the ability through its own efforts to take out Russian oil production facilities. And they've disrupted about a third of Russia's export production, I'm told. And Russia's making about $180 million a day off these exports. So when you disrupt a third of it, you're really cutting at the revenue that Russia needs to keep its economy going and keep the war going. On the other hand, it's springtime in Ukraine, and so Russian attacks on the power plants didn't shut them down over the winter, and now it's spring. Meanwhile, Russia's continuing its grinding offensive on the ground, where Ukrainian forces are suffering from shortages of ammunition and other things, and the lingering effects of the American cutoff, even the cutoff that was a year ago for 6 months in 2024, has had an impact on the supply chain. So look, thus far, this is all in Russia's favor.
You can play this a lot of different ways here, General. The fact that Vladimir Putin did not accept a ceasefire, the fact that Donald Trump has not been able to finish this in his first day in office as he projected and promised on the campaign trail. Does he deserve credit, though, for maintaining the flow of U.S. aid to Ukraine?
Well, we don't know how much is getting in there, but yes, and the intelligence is also very important. And so far as we know, that intelligence is still going on.
Well, and as we consider whether or not that's going to continue, we understand one of the conditions Russia has to reach an absolute ceasefire is it wants the U.S. to provide no more aid to Ukraine. When we consider that, the prospect of a peacekeeping force in order to maintain the actual truce, if indeed it can be reached, is what Russia is asking for realistic? What kind of compromise do you see?
It's certainly realistic for Russia to ask for it. It's not realistic for Ukraine to accept it. And information is the lifeblood of a ceasefire, of a peace agreement. Information on both sides. Russia has it. There's no way to shut it off to Russia. Russia's spy satellites are up there. They have them. Ukraine won't have it unless the United States provides it. And what happened in the Kursk salient is a good example of what happens when you turn off the intelligence. Russia pulled forces out quickly, massed against the Kursk salient, and overran it. And that was during the few days in which the United States had blinded Ukraine, essentially, on what was going on behind the lines. So got to have that intelligence flow, and it can't be cut off if you want a stable and sustainable peace.
General, I want your take on the readout that we got today from the White House, knowing that President Trump had said just last week on Air Force One that this call with Vladimir Putin was about divvying up land, dividing land, and even power plants. Those were the two things he suggested they would discuss. And, of course, here we are with this energy infrastructure ceasefire at hand. But they said in the readout that President Trump discussed Ukraine's electrical supply suggesting the United States could be helpful in running those plants. Didn't mention any specifically like Zaporizhia, but said American ownership of those plants would be the best protection for the infrastructure and support of the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. What does that mean exactly? Is that the security guarantee that this White House puts forward? And are we slouching into occupation, General?
It might be considered the security guarantee. But look, those are old, what we consider obsolescent nuclear plants. We didn't design those plants. They're not our plants. We can't just transplant people over there and say, hey, by the way, this is the GE design. Go after it. It isn't. But yes, we could learn to take care of those plants. Now, Ukraine can take care of those plants as well. Zaporizhia, the plant's been partially occupied by the Russians. They've threatened to damage it and destroy it at various times. It wouldn't be such a bad thing if the United States says, well, now you can't touch it because we're in it. Maybe it's a way of getting a creeping cessation of hostilities. But it's also a way of just postponing the really tough discussion of telling Mr. Putin, stop, you're the aggressor, pull out, return the abducted children, pay the reparations, and let's get on with the global affairs. You can't just wash this, you just can't wash it away. He has to take the burden of guilt for the aggression. He started the war. It's easy for him to stop it. All he has to say is stop.
General, we only have a minute left, but we saw reporting from NBC yesterday that the U.S. is considering giving up control of the position of NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe. You, of course, yourself held that position. Is it vital that it stays in U.S. hands, that an American serve that role?
It is the critical linkage between the United States and Europe militarily. It serves as a deterrent purpose. It also serves a diplomatic purpose. And without it, the U.S. is decoupled from Europe. Nothing would make the Kremlin happier than for the United States to give up that position. But I've been told privately that discussion floated and it's been squashed. I hope that's correct.
Retired General Wesley Clark, it's great to have you back, sir. Former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, we thank you for the insights. Coming up, Democrats strategizing their next move after last week's funding battle. Let's take a look at their plans with Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida. She's next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
I myself don't give away anything for nothing. And I think that's what happened the other day. We could have, in my view, perhaps gotten them to agree to a third way. They may not have agreed to it, but at least the public would have seen they're not agreeing to it. And then they would have been shutting government down.
Former Speaker of the House, of course, Nancy Pelosi, talking yesterday during Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's handling of the Republican spending plan. I myself don't give away anything for nothing, she said. The comments coming as Democrats struggle to develop a cohesive strategy and position themselves for success in the midterms and beyond. As we consider the posture and tone coming from the party, we're joined now by Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida. She formerly chaired the DNC and is with us live tonight. Congresswoman, it's great to see you. I don't have to tell you what's been happening at Republican town hall meetings recently. In fact, a lot of them have stopped occurring because of the blowback that members have been getting. You held a telephone town hall, I understand, in February. I just wonder, the strategy right now, Congresswoman, is this about letting go of the reins, giving the rope, whatever cliche you're looking for, or do Democrats need to be holding their own meetings and beating the drum on this?
Well, we are. I mean, I had 6,000 people on my town hall, and I had an opportunity to hear from a wide range of opinions, and not all of them were thrilled. But, our folks want to see that we are fighting back, and they want to know how we're fighting back. And it's very frustrating for all of us that we are in the minority and that we don't have institutional levers of power, but we're fighting in Congress, in courts, in the community, and we all that are elected should be communicating and interacting with our constituents. And the fact that the National Republican Congressional Committee told their members, their Republican members, not to do town halls, not to take feedback and hear from their constituents is shocking. They're slashing Medicaid, taking health care away from seniors, from children, from the disabled. I have 110,000 people on Medicaid in my congressional district, and that means that Republicans are going to kick my seniors out of nursing homes and children off of their health care, and people will die. I mean, that's right at their feet. They certainly have a lot to answer for and should be showing up to talk to their constituents about it.
Well, I'd like to expand, Congresswoman, on this notion of fighting back, because arguably the notion that Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer did not fight back hard enough, at least in the view of some, is what has gotten him into hot water with calls for potentially new leadership in the Senate. Is it helpful for the party to be having those conversations in public?
Look, I didn't agree with Chuck Schumer's decision, and I voted no on the really abominable budget bill that Republicans had $23 billion in cuts to our veterans and really significant cuts to infrastructure and health care. But that's what we're united around. We are united against those kinds of cuts, against Musk and his DOGE bags going into agency after agency and illegally firing people. They're getting, shut down in court when lawsuits are coming because they are breaking the law. We have to come together as Democrats to make sure that the stagflation, where you have inflation and a slowing in growth in the economy, that's a deadly combination where we're headed towards a recession. Trump is doing nothing to lower people's prices. We've got housing and health care and grocery prices that are still too high. That's where our priorities should lie. Republicans' priorities are to make enough room through these cuts to give tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires and wealthy corporations. And that's the kind of contrast we have to present to our constituents leading up to hopefully winning the majority back in the 2026 election in the House.
Well, Doge bags is one I did not have on my bingo card. Congresswoman,
well, you're welcome.
In the meantime, well, okay, we're about to have a conversation about the Supreme Court, about the legal challenges against some of Donald Trump's policies, whether it's USAID, whether it's transgender members of the military. Right. Is the check going to come from the courts
probationary employees
for the rest of this year, as opposed to Congress?
Well, yes. I mean, we have multiple ways, Congress, the courts, and the community, that we have to push back on this administration that has run amok. They've run amok and run afoul of the Constitution. They are acting unlawfully through firings, through making cuts that are literally undercutting the spending that Congress has required by law. I mean, they're gearing up to cut, almost $1 trillion out of Medicaid, and those are all cuts that will be devastating to our seniors, to our veterans, to children, to families. And we have to fight them in the courts. We have to fight them in the community by shining a spotlight on what they're doing and how it's devastating people's lives. And we have to fight back in Congress. They have a 3-vote margin, a 3-vote majority, the Republicans do in the House. And we have to make sure that we hold them accountable. And look, Joe and Kayleigh, it takes 3, Republicans with a spine to step up and decide, no, I'm not going to prioritize billionaires over real regular people who need to make sure that they can have an affordable quality of life, that they can go to the doctor when they're sick, they can make sure that they can put affordable food on the table, that they don't have to choose between affording their prescription drugs and paying their rent. That is what Republicans under Donald Trump and Musk, our Dems and extreme MAGA Republicans in Congress, are showing that they don't care about.
Finally, Congresswoman, as we consider what is ahead in terms of the congressional agenda, knowing they are planning to pursue along partisan lines a budget reconciliation package, there is a question as to whether or not a raising of the debt ceiling will ultimately be included in that. And given what we just went through with the continuing resolution and Democrats in the House specifically not being willing to provide votes, will the debt ceiling be a different story?
The debt ceiling is something that we really have to do But we have to do it as part of the regular legislative process. Republicans can't just, hide their heads and tuck their tail and sneak that debt ceiling vote into a bill that is going to be purposefully drawn to make enough room to give massive tax breaks to billionaires and millionaires and corporations. They're going to try to make enough room by raising the debt ceiling for the rest of Donald Trump's term. That's so they don't have to deal with it again, and they can get away with just hiding the debt ceiling increase in a very large package and not be held accountable for doing it. And that's just unacceptable, and we're going to fight them tooth and nail on it.
All right, Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida, thank you so much for joining us and discussing in part what's happening between the executive and judicial branch, something we heard about from the White House press secretary Karoline Leavitt during the briefing today, targeting what she calls activist judges, accusing them of a partisan effort to slow the implementation of President Trump's agenda. Take a listen.
We have judges who are acting as partisan activists from the bench. They are trying to dictate policy from the President of the United States. They are trying to clearly slow walk this administration's agenda, and it's unacceptable.
Joining us for more right now, Bloomberg's Greg Stohr with us at the table. It's great to see you, Greg. You're suddenly getting pretty busy again here, and there's the prospect of more of these cases going to the Supreme Court, as a judge found just yesterday that Elon Musk may well have violated the Constitution when it came to the dismantling of USAID. We've seen another order on transgender members of the military. I could keep going here with the list. At what point does the Supreme Court step in, and how soon might this happen with some of these?
We're going to have a barrage at some point. We already have 3 cases that have gotten to the Supreme Court in emergency fashion. One that's still pending is an emergency request by Trump to be allowed to partially implement his birthright citizenship restrictions. Mm-hmm. The cases you talked about, we could talk about, the firing of members, Democratic commissioners on the FTC. That could get to the Supreme Court. Donald Trump's ability to withhold funds that have been appropriated by Congress, that's going to get to the Supreme Court in some form. It's all coming. It's just a question of how quickly.
Wow.
Well, so if it's kind of inevitable here, then it becomes the question as to whether or not even the Supreme Court's ruling will be abided by. That's the live conversation we're having. If the judges' decisions actually matter to this administration, have we seen tangible evidence that they are not willing to follow court orders?
Well, they, of course, say that they are following court orders, and Donald Trump has said he's following court orders. But an awful lot of people, including a lot of judges, seem to think they are not. And obviously this has come to a head this week with the judge here in Washington, Judge Boasberg, and the flight of alleged Venezuelan gang members, deporting them to El Salvador, and the question about whether the administration defied an order to have planes turned around. This is a question we're going to be talking about an awful lot.
It certainly is. Greg Stohr is going to have a lot to report about. Thank you so much for joining us as we follow this. And as Greg just mentioned, last night, President Trump fired both Democratic members of the Federal Trade Commission. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt defending that move today.
Why now? Sure. Because the time was right to let these people go, and the president absolutely has the authority to do it, and they were given ample notice. The goal was to let these individuals go. If we have to fight it all the way to the Supreme Court, we certainly will.
One of those dismissed FTC commissioners, Rebecca Kelly Slaughter, is joining us now. Commissioner, thank you for being here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I understand you do plan to sue over your firing. Is it your intention to take it all the way to the Supreme Court? And are you worried about the potential consequence if the court were to rule against you, overturn 90 years of precedent, and what that might mean for other commissioners at agencies or even, say, the Federal Reserve?
Thanks so much for having me. Yes, it is absolutely my intention to sue, as it is Commissioner Bedoya's. I want to be really clear, though. These firings were not legal, and therefore we do not believe that they were effective. I think it is important to go to court to vindicate that right, and much more than being worried about a bad decision from the Supreme Court, I am worried about the consequences of letting efforts like this stand and what that will mean for the enforcement of the law without fear or favor across the government.
You were fired via email, commissioner. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Well, I would say
how does that
they
work?
Are attempting to they're attempting to fire us via email, but
okay, I understand the spirit of your language, but what did that email say? And did you both get the same one?
I believe we both got the same one. It said that effective immediately, you are terminated.
You spoke with the FTC chair about this, Chair Ferguson. What's his thought?
We did not talk about his opinion on the matter. We just talked about the fact that it had happened and what next steps looked like from his perspective administratively.
Well, so when we consider his perspective or just his voice now at the FTC in the absence of you and your colleagues' voices, if it's him at the helm, not the Democratic commissioners, how will that actually change the way in which FTC business is done?
So that's the really important point here. It doesn't change what Chairman Ferguson can do. He is the chairman of the agency. The Republicans are in the majority, and we are in the minority. We can't control the actions of the agency, but we can add transparency and accountability, and that is really important for protecting integrity of the markets.
The statute governing the FTC says commissioners can only be removed for cause. Was there any indication that you were fired for cause, or that your attempted firing was for cause?
No, there was no claim of cause, and the statute actually specifically says cause means neglect, malfeasance, or inefficiency, and there was no claim of any of those on the part of Commissioner Bedoya or myself, just that the president had the right to fire us, and so he was doing it. And to be clear, that statute is over 100 years old, and only one time in history has a president attempted to remove an FTC commissioner over a policy disagreement. It was 90 years ago. President Roosevelt tried to remove Commissioner Humphrey, and in the face of the clear language of the statute, the Supreme Court said that was illegal, that the statute is constitutional, and that FTC commissioners and other commissioners of multi-member bipartisan agencies cannot be simply removed because the president doesn't agree with them.
Well, so as we talk about some of those other examples, keeping in mind we are having this discussion with you on the day we got a Fed rate decision, is this directly applicable to what is supposed to be an independent central bank? Is that one way in which market participants should be looking at this?
Yes, that's exactly right. And market participants should be scared. To be clear, there's no legal difference between Jerome Powell and me. In fact, he and I were both originally appointed by President Trump around the same time in early 2018. And if the president can illegally remove me, he can illegally remove Jerome Powell. And the market that depends on the independence of the Fed and monetary policy being set not to do favors to the president's political allies or fortunes, but to protect the integrity of the U.S. economy, people should be very worried about that.
Commissioner Slaughter, I'm trying to get to the bottom of the motivation here. The press secretary was asked about the timing today, as well as the reasoning. You were one of only 2 Democrats at the FTC. You were clearly not steering policy here. The chair was in charge of that. What does your removal change in terms of outcomes by this body?
It's a great question. It doesn't change what the chairman can do. It does change whether there is going to be transparency or accountability when he does it. So if you imagine, well, we believe in a system. Our system is grounded on the idea that the law can be enforced without fear or favor. It is notable that of the collection of CEOs that flanked the president at his inauguration, the FTC is currently actively litigating against almost all of them, or all of their companies, I should say. And if you imagine that the president calls Chairman Ferguson up and says, drop this lawsuit or sue someone else because my political allies don't like them, there won't be anyone available to call that out and provide transparency and accountability. I'm going to apologize for the background noise. I am volunteering at my child's school, and so it gets a little bit chaotic here because families do not stop for political activity.
Well, we understand you are joining us both in your professional capacity and in your capacity as a mom, and we really appreciate you making the time. Just on that note, on the outstanding cases the FTC is pursuing, are there any specific that you fear might actually go away entirely, cannot be litigated to its end as a result of what has just taken place?
Yeah, well, I fear any of them being dismissed or settled for really insufficient remedies. I worry what happens in our merger enforcement program. But I think a really important case to pay attention to is the FTC's current active lawsuit against the pharmacy benefit managers over the price of insulin. That is a case in which Commissioner Bedoya and I are currently sitting as judges, and the other FTC commissioners are recused from that case. And so if Commissioner Bedoya and I are not there, I don't know what happens to that case. There is no precedent for this, but it is a really important issue that matters to millions of Americans, both those who depend on insulin and those who depend on other drugs whose prices have allegedly been raised by the work of the PBMs. And so I'm really worried about that case, among others.
Is this, Commissioner, the principle of winning your case, or do you really want to go back into this world? You could be at your child's school every day if you wanted to be.
That's true. This is not about me, and it's not about my job. This is about a really important principle of law enforcement without fear or favor. And to be clear, it's not even just about the FTC. It's about the SEC and the CFTC. We've already talked about the Fed. All of these agencies in which markets rely to provide stability and integrity are at risk of becoming political pawns if this decision is allowed to stand. So yes, I'm perfectly fine. I'm happy to spend time with my children, but I care much more about the principles at stake here.
We're glad you could join us to talk about it. Rebecca Kelly-Slaughter will be tracking your case, and we'd love to stay in touch with you here on Bloomberg. Thanks for being with us. Coming up, Democrats trying to capitalize on the cold reception that some Republicans are receiving in their home districts. We'll discuss with our political panel next. They're on the way in on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg TV and radio.
Rita and I are going to take questions and hear from you, and I don't think it's going to be that different than I'm hearing from my constituents about trade wars, about Medicare and all that. But this is what your representative needs to be here for. Because if they were proud of what they did, it's very hard to find an elected official who doesn't want to be in front of a crowd or a camera. When they don't want to be, you know something's up. And the something that up is, even people who voted for this didn't vote for what they're getting.
You haven't seen Tim Walz in a while, have you? The former Democratic vice presidential candidate, governor of Minnesota. They're in Des Moines, Iowa over the weekend, holding the first of several town halls in Republican House districts. This is the strategy some high-profile Democrats are following as the party plots its way forward after major defeats, of course, in 2024. Some Republicans, of course, holding town halls, as we've told you, at home and facing very angry voters. Here's Republican Congressman Mike Flood just last night, Columbus, Nebraska. Watch, listen.
As we saw during his first term, President Trump successfully used tariffs to rewrite. The only way this is going to work, folks, is if I get the opportunity to answer the question.
Sounds fun, right? Joining us now this evening's political panel, Roger Fisk is with us, former aide to President Obama, our Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Rob Waters, managing partner at the Madison Group here in Washington. Gentlemen, welcome. Great to have both of you with us. What do we think is going on here, Mr. Waters? Is it par for the course as a lawmaker? You go home, you get screamed at, or is it better off not holding town halls right now?
I think God bless the populace. Let them come out. That's what town halls are for.
Yeah, it changes the perception, though, of these lawmakers while they're home, and it changes the narrative because we're talking about it back here in Washington.
I mean, when I worked for a member of Congress, we used to get yelled at by everything, and
so this is the game.
It just is what it is.
Yeah. Is it what it is, though, or does this actually potentially have implications for 2026 if they are getting blowback back home in their districts, knowing the majority that they have right now is very tight if they can hold on to it?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me, and I love being here with Rob. We'll have to see if this really turns into 1, 2, 3 quarters of activity. Right now, these are kind of blips. And then whether or not some of these people end up getting primaried, whether or not they get a robust challenge in what would otherwise be a safe seat. some things like that. That, to me, will demonstrate that these things are actually having like a material impact. But for now, I think it's essentially kind of a made for social media kind of moment. And then we'll have to just see if there's dozens and dozens of data points over the next weeks and months to see if it's a sustainable.
Well, that's interesting because I'm sure you remember Obamacare summer when lawmakers went home and came back.
Can't picture it.
You blacked it out, probably is why. But lawmakers came back in and actually started to impact policy. Can we see that here?
I think we're in a different age, and I'm going to go on Roger's excellent point, which is, look, it's first quarter. I don't think anything matters until the actual 8 weeks before an election to 12 weeks before an election. I think people are being reactionary in a Twitter and social media world, and 100 people don't make that much of a difference now.
Yeah. And may I just build on that very quickly?
Of course.
I always think of the things that aren't happening. And you mentioned the Obamacare town halls. Yeah. There is zero discussion from the administration about the Affordable Care Act, which has been essentially a mantra on the right for over 10 years now to dismantle that. And you would think in this in this moment, when there's all this momentum towards closing down agencies and dismantling programs, that now would be this kind of shining opportunity to do this thing that they've said they've wanted to do all along, and it's MIA on their agenda.
Well, they do have 4 years. We're only 8 weeks in, and obviously he's made it pretty clear what his immediate priorities are, inclusive of tariffs, yes, which we've already seen, but tax cuts, for
and getting
example.
the astronauts home.
Yes, we did. We had
right?
special coverage of that yesterday here on Bloomberg TV and radio,
remarkable.
in fact.
Yes, indeed.
But is he going to get around to some of these other things, or is everything he's trying to front load really the only things he actually wants to accomplish in the second term?
Listen, I think a president has about 6 months of his second term to actually get what he wants. You become somewhat, and I'm not going to say irrelevant, but less powerful after 2026 because of everybody who's looking at 2028. So I think you hit it hard. You hit it now. You get what you got. I mean, Roger, you would agree. I mean,
the first 6 to 9 months of any presidency, and you can go all the way back to the Reagan tax cuts on through George Bush Sr. with the Americans with Disabilities Acts, their signature domestic legislative accomplishment is going to be in the first 6 to 9 months.
Let's talk about what's happening on your side of the aisle. This is a bumpy week for Chuck Schumer. Canceled the book tour. He's getting knocked in the head with threats of a primary battle, calls maybe for him to step down. Glenn Ivey actually went there, a Democratic member of Congress here from Maryland. Is this also par for the course? I thought it was easier to be in the minority.
I think that the disorganization of the left right now, even just look at, it wasn't a State of the Union, but look at the president's speech to the nation, where there's like kind of a scattershot bunch of ricocheting reactions. There's a desire for a couple people to pay the price for this. And one of the things that happens with leadership is that very often they have to act in an institutional way, which tends to cleave them off from the core values of their party. And you're seeing this play out now. You throw into that a generational element. You throw into that some of the home state dynamics, and you have a very ambitious congresswoman that could potentially challenge. And then you end up in a situation where Senator Schumer could be, thinking that he'd rather spend time with the family.
Wow.
Well, so is this good for Republicans or bad? Do they need Chuck Schumer as a foil? Do they want new blood to potentially come in?
I think the messaging from the Democratic Party is a gift, and it just keeps on giving. But I'm going to defend an institution. I don't think the Senate cares what the House thinks, and it never has. So,
fair enough.
Beyond that.
But I love Capitol Hill, though. Are we in a world where Chuck Schumer's actually going to lose his job as a leader?
Not before 2026, but possibly.
So we're going to live through this through the midterms. Clearly, you take a primary threat seriously from an AOC? No. Why not?
I just don't see it real in the politics of New York.
Well, and we have several more years till we get to that. 2026 first, then you get to 2028, and all that comes with it. When we think about the more immediate future, Roger, the battle's still ahead. Where is the next opportunity for the actual Democrat fighting back that they are suggesting they didn't see enough from Schumer this go-around?
Well, part of it is, I think, some of the footage that you showed of Governor Walz. So just the kind of intense, kind of organic grassroots politics out there in the communities and giving people a place to go and essentially vent and express and be heard and things like that. Part of it is also, I think there's a vacuum right now, and someone could step forward, maybe a Chris Murphy, any number of other people, Raphael Warnock, and put together some kind of weekly summary in a simple 2.5, 3 minute direct-to-camera format where they said, this is what's going on in the courts, this is what's going on in the communities, this is what's going on in the chambers, and wrap this all into one cohesive narrative arc of not only resistance but of an agenda. Because right now it's much more diffuse and it's just going in 1,000 directions, which, as we all know, means that you're not going in any one direction at all.
Next step, of course, is the drive to reconciliation. Trump tax cuts, debt ceiling, we talk about them every day. The drive on K Street has already begun, right? This is time, a massive time of volatility, but a profitable time for lobbyists in Washington. When does this come together into the form of a bill?
I just want to say how much I agree with Roger that there is no absolute message or leadership coming out of the Democratic Party.
Okay.
And I appreciate that. Look, everybody is looking forward to the tax cuts. It's necessary to promote our agenda. It's necessary for the economy. How we get there, it's a wait-and-see approach. Again, you know, it's a mathematical number. I mean,
will lobbyists write the bill or lawmakers?
I think America will write the bill.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, 300 million people weighing in seems a lot harder than the 530.
Like YouGov or something.
We'll
see about that.
We'll tweet it out and everyone can say what they want.
A minute left here. Whoever writes it, is it done before the August recess?
Yes.
Yes.
One of the Achilles heels of the Trump both administrations is the inability to legislate. He's great on the messaging stuff. He's great on TV. He's great with the executive orders, et cetera. But the inability to, for example, get the wall done or healthcare or infrastructure, all those things in the first term that he talked about and said they would be quite easy and et cetera, we're starting to see now. And at some point, the gas runs out of the tank of the executive orders because you can get through them 60, 80 in the first day. And at some point, you got to start legislating, and that'll shine a light on a part of the Trump organization that's traditionally been quite weak.
Well, he was able to use phone calls to get a House Speaker and a continuing resolution passed. I guess we'll see about the rest of it. Roger Fisk and Rob Waters, our political panel this evening, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll have more on what's coming up ahead tomorrow, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. And as we get ready to wrap up the day here in Washington, we're looking ahead to a big day on Bloomberg tomorrow. Make sure you tune in to Bloomberg Technology's interview with Tim Costa, Senior Director of Quantum Computing at NVIDIA. Begins at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Yeah, this is all NVIDIA all the time this week. We'll have a lot to learn as we watch the stock for you and talking AI here on Balance of Power. We thank you for joining us and see you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.